In this video, I'm going to show you how to make koji, a fascinating transformative ingredient and one which will lay the groundwork for several more videos that I've got coming up. Koji opens up the possibilities of making misos, soy sauces, tenderizing marinades, vegetable charcuterie and various flavorful oils. It's been used by people for thousands of years and has a rich history in Asian cuisine. Koji is rice inoculated with a specific fungus, Aspergillus oryzae. It can be made with other substrates, so Noma for instance use pearl barley, but I make a more traditional Japanese rice koji. It's the key to the fermentation of miso, soy sauce and sake, as well as a range of other fermented products, and a raft of modern adaptations and interpretations of these. Over the last decade we've seen a huge fermentation revival, and the creative exploration of koji in modern high-end Western restaurants spearheaded by places like Noma and Momofuku. Now, I'm not an expert on koji, but I do make it regularly and use it, I think, in a few interesting applications. So today I'm going to show you how to make rice koji, and then I have some future videos coming up that will show you various different applications for it. But if this is a subject that you're really interested in, there's some further reading I'd suggest as well. The Noma Guide to Fermentation is an incredibly user-friendly guide to Noma's fermentation techniques and how these can be adapted to make at home. It includes guides on how to make a koji incubation chamber like the one that I'm going to use in this video. Sandor Katz's The Art of Fermentation is an incredible book to give you a grounding and understanding of fermentation in various forms. And Koji Alchemy is a great detailed primer specific to koji and contains some great creative applications for it that I haven't seen anywhere else. So I'm going to take you through my process, but this is such a big subject that if you really want to learn a lot more and get into making things like your own misos, I'd highly recommend having a look through those books. Most of the literature around koji at some point describes it as magical, and with its tropical fruit aromas and its transformative power in food, it's easy to see why. Another analogy that crops up more than once is it being like highly advanced organic technology. Once grown, koji produces enzymes that break down carbohydrates and proteins. So carbohydrates become sweeter as they break down into simple sugars, and proteins can become deeply savoury and umami rich as they break down into amino acids. The transformation of protein-rich but relatively bland soybeans into a deeply delicious umami-rich soy sauce is a fantastic example of this process at work. And koji is a fascinating ingredient in itself too. Its incredible ripe fruit aromas are intoxicating and something I've worked on capturing through vacuum distillation and infusions into oils. At the end of the video I'm going to show you how to make Shio koji as well, a liquid that can be used to tenderize proteins and in marinades too. So to make koji we need to start off with koji spores, also called koji kin. I buy mine from Fermentation Culture EU and I'll link to them in the description. Then I use a short grain white rice to grow my koji spores on. So the first thing is to get this rice cooked to the correct amount. This is quite important for the growth of the koji, that it has the correct amount of moisture and doneness. It can't be too wet or cooked too far. I'm using 2.5 kilos of rice, and to get a consistent result I prepare it the same way every time. I rinse the rice well until the water coming off the rice runs clear. This does take a little while. Then once the water is running clear, I cover the rice with water and let it sit and soak for an hour. After an hour I completely drain the rice and then I will steam it for 30 minutes, giving it a mix in the steamer about halfway through. Cooking the rice like this should give us the perfect finished rice for making koji, not too wet or too dry. Then once it's cooked I let the steamed rice cool to 30 degrees. That cooked rice gets transferred into trays lined with cotton tea towels. And then now that it's at 30 degrees, I'm going to inoculate it with the spores. For this amount of rice, I only need 1 gram of koji spores. So to make it easier to evenly distribute the spores through the rice, I mix them with 30 grams of rice flour in a shaker. Then I can take my koji spores and rice flour mix and dust my cooked rice generously with that. You can mix it into the rice with gloved hands too. And then now it's ready to go into an incubation box. I use a setup very similar to the one described in the Noma Guide to Fermentation, so if you want to set up something like this, I'd highly recommend reading that for the most detailed instructions. Koji requires quite a specific environment to grow, and that's what our incubation box is going to provide. It needs to be at 30 degrees Celsius and 75% relative humidity. I use an insulated box designed for catering, and then inside that I have a small seedling mat to provide the gentle heat source, and this little novelty humidifier for the humidity. These are each controlled with Inkbird temperature and humidity controllers. The reason for the novelty humidifier is I needed one that turns off and automatically back on when the power is cut out and then restored to it via that Inkbird humidity controller. And the heater's the same. My cooked rice that's been inoculated with the koji spores is going to be placed into this incubation chamber set at 30 degrees and 75% relative humidity, and it will take 40 to 48 hours to grow fully. After 24 hours, I break up the rice with gloved hands and shape it into 3 rows to aid heat escape. At this point, the metabolic heat produced by the koji growing can actually bring the temperature up so much that it can kill the koji itself if you're not careful. So shaping the koji into these rows gives a larger surface area for heat to escape, and also to help with this, I leave the lid of the incubation box slightly ajar now for the rest of the incubation. As the koji fungus grows, it produces hyphae, like tiny delicate roots into the grains of rice, spreading out and binding it together with a mycelium network. It's ready to use after about 44 to 48 hours once all the grains are covered in a delicate white fur of koji. Then it's a case of halting the koji's growth by placing it in the fridge for 12 hours. If you're going to use it soon, you can store the koji in the fridge for up to 48 hours, or you can freeze it for longer term storage. And so that's our koji prepared. It is a number of steps, and if you aren't already doing a certain amount of fermentation, then it probably requires some new equipment and methods that are also new to you. But once you get into making koji, it just unlocks a whole new range of fermentations and ways of producing umami-rich, delicious products. I'm going to show you some more uses for koji in future videos, but right now I'm going to quickly show you how to make Shio koji as well. Shio koji is simple to make. It's a mixture of koji, water and salt, which are blended together and left to ferment at room temperature for 7 to 10 days. And then after that fermentation, it's ready to use. And it's very popular to use this to tenderize proteins. So for most chefs that would mean meat or fish, but as a plant-based chef, I use this on my vegetarian or vegan menu to marinate and tenderize either halloumi or tofu. I mix the Shio koji with rose water and lemon juice, and then I marinate either the halloumi or the tofu in the fridge in that mixture for a week. The enzymes in the koji help to break down the proteins, which, particularly with the halloumi, results in this soft marshmallow-like texture once it's been marinated and then cooked, as well as a subtle rose flavour. I cook this in a charcoal batter and serve it with my vacuum concentrated rhubarb molasses. I've done a video on how I make the rhubarb molasses using the rotary vacuum evaporator, and I will link to that in the description. So that's it for today's video. I will be posting videos soon on how to use koji to make miso, vegetable charcuterie, and how to use its unique aromatics in a dessert. So do subscribe to make sure that you don't miss those. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you soon.